So we are recording. Again, if you could just please share your name, quickly introduce yourself, your district, and your role. Welcome, everyone. Glad to see some familiar faces and some new ones as well. And we're going to wait just about another minute or two for a few more folks to join us this morning. See. And if I could ask one of my colleagues, Katie, if you could put the note catcher for today in the chat. The deck that you're going to see today, the presentation, there's a copy of it in the note catcher. I highly suggest opening it to follow along or take notes in there as you like, as we go through the session. Oh, I'm being projected. That always makes it a little bit more nerve-wracking, but you know, just pretend I didn't read that one. I think as soon as you know that, you imagine yourself on a very big screen, but welcome. I'm glad to have all of you here this afternoon. All right, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna ask if one of my colleagues, if you're able to turn on our closed caption or live transcript feed, if you could do that, that would be great. If not, we'll just keep it moving. So just to quickly introduce myself for those of you who are new to our drop-in session today, my name is Irene Teskey and I'm based in the Bay Area, which is why I started to say good morning. But I'm glad to be here with you all today. I'm a senior manager here at TNTP, and I'm actually going to be co-facilitating with one of my colleagues today. I'll give her a moment to introduce herself.
Thanks, Irene. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Thursday. My name is Margaret Bruce, Senior Manager of Academics here at TNTP, based in the Albany, New York area, so not too far from the Mass border. Thank you so much for taking some time from your very busy days to join us. Looking forward to the session with you all today.
Thanks, Margaret. So again, this is our second session of the Drop-in Leader series. Today, we're going to be discussing how to build and fortify background knowledge in order to accelerate learning. Before we jump into our new learning for today, we're going to spend a little bit of time orienting to some of our norms and our partnership with DESE. So as many of you already know, DESE and TNTP partnered earlier this year on the creation of the acceleration roadmaps. And the idea was to provide guidance and recommendations to educators around these three overarching priorities that you see on your screen. And today we'll be highlighting and focusing on how we can ensure strong grade appropriate instruction, and building background knowledge or activating schema has a very close relationship to just-in-time scaffolds. So we'll be making connections there to that third priority. And so here are a few norms we'd like for you all to embrace for our learning today. But first, we also wanted to just thank you all for making the time again for yourselves during what we know is a very busy workday to be present with us. We know it's not easy to shut your office door and to stop being fully present in your school day to participate with us. So again, we thank you for being here. And speaking of being fully present, we know it can be tempting sometimes to just sign on to listen in, but I always like to remind participants that we strive for high engagement during our sessions. So today you'll be asked to join breakouts, to come off of mute and share your thinking and reflections. So we thank you in advance for fully engaging with your learning community today. And so with that, I'd like to give you a moment to read some of our norms in yellow that you see on the screen and just chat which one you'd like to keep front of mind today for our time together. Thanks for kicking us off, Martha. Joy and humor, always glad to see those. Norms coming through, great. Thanks everyone for sharing what you're going to keep front of mind today as we go through our learning and some practice. And then we have a few virtual norms. We like to ask folks to be on video as much as you can. We know it's not the way everyone engages, so if you cannot be on video, that's fine. But especially when you go into breakouts, if you can be on video, please do so. If you need to step away at any moment for any reason, please try to minimize leaving during the breakouts because that's really our time to collaborate with one another. And then finally, if you have any questions about the materials or something very specific, please direct message our colleague Tabitha Heyman, who's also on the call. She'll be able to reach out you any links that you may need or answer any more immediate questions that Margaret or I maybe won't be able to get to as quickly. So with that, I'm going to share before I share to Margaret, I'm going to ask you all to take a moment to read our objectives for today. And after you've read them, to just chat in the chat box what you're most excited about learning today. Great, thank you, everyone. As usual, Margaret and I see a lot of 2s and 3s coming through. And we just like to remind folks that we will be doing application throughout. And our first objective there really sets the stage and foundation for understanding how we can provide these effective strategies to our students. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret.
Thanks, Irene. Love to see a couple of 1s in the objectives as well, because that's the objective that we're going to start with now, starting with schema. So we can go ahead and advance to the next slide. And throughout the session, I may occasionally ask one of you all to read something aloud. And so please feel free to just say pass if you're not up for that today. So let's go ahead and get started with the first objective, which will be to clarify the role and importance of schema building to accelerate learning. And I would love to ask Lisa A, if you don't mind, to read the definition of schema for us at the top of this slide, please. Oh, might have lost Lisa A. Clark Smith, would you mind reading the definition of schema for us, please?
Schema refers to our knowledge about different topics. We use our existing knowledge to understand the world around us and build new knowledge. Connecting new information. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Go for it. Go for it, Clark. That's perfect.
Connecting new information to prior knowledge facilitates the processing of information so that rather than getting lost or deleted, new learning makes it to the brain's long-term storage area.
Thank you so much, Clark. Appreciate you coming up mute and jumping right in to read aloud for us. So let's spend the next couple of minutes doing some practice and thinking about the brain science of schema. So schema is referring to the mental structures that we apply to our understanding of the world and serves as a framework for related concepts or prior knowledge. But why does schema really matter for learning, though? That's the question. Success at learning something new largely depends on the brain's ability to connect the new information to our stored prior knowledge. So as information is being taught, students' brains are actively working to try to make sense of all of these new concepts. And what students' brains are doing are linking and integrating the incoming information with the prior knowledge that they have. So when students' brains are able to make these links to background knowledge with new texts, say, students are better at making inferences, they're better at clarifying ambiguity, they're better at chunking ideas, and they retain information more effectively. Having prior knowledge activated also speeds up learning. And it does this because it's freeing up students' working memory at the same time so that they can connect that new information more rapidly. On the other hand, a lack of adequate prior knowledge does a disservice and can create a misfire in the learning process. So let's take a closer look at how this might actually work for students and kind of sit in the student seat ourselves. So something that writers do is that they assume background knowledge. So let's consider the following passage on the slide here about John's face. And again, I would love to invite a reader to read this for the collective today. So Donna M., if you don't mind, if I'm not interrupting, would you please read the passage about John's face for us, please?
Sure. This is very appropriate because my husband is John and tends to have a bit of a protruding belly. So John's face fell as he looked down at his protruding belly. The invitation specified black tie, and he hadn't worn his tux since his own wedding 20 years earlier.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much, Donna, and love to learn about John as well. Safe space here, and glad you were able to share that reference with us and read aloud for us. So let's think in the chat, what is happening in this passage? What did you infer? What schema was activated for you as a reader? Go ahead and share your thinking about this passage in the chat, please. Thank you, Kim. Great. And this is a body positive space, so absolutely no concern about John here, but we're going through the practice of making inferences for us as well. Right, his falling face and what that meant. Interesting background of the black tie. Oh, Melissa, getting deep. I appreciate that. Absolutely, Jennifer. So gold star to everyone here. You were able to make accurate inferences about John, that perhaps he was worried he had gained some weight. He might not be able to fit into his tux. We didn't have to ponder, right, as the sophisticated readers that we are. We didn't have to think too much about it. And likewise, the author didn't have to spell out exactly what was happening and give us the minutia and the detail of John. So you don't have to make inferences consciously because your knowledge helps you access all of the ideas associated with the words on the page. So when you read the word tux, the cognitive processes that are happening in our brains, we're thinking of all those related concepts, right? We're thinking about the expense of a tux, occasions at which one might don a tux, right? Some of us are also thinking of the process of aging and perhaps feelings that can come about within the process of aging and how complex all of that can be. That was everything that you all just shared in the chat was a demonstration of how your schema is activated in all of those connections that your brains are making as sophisticated readers. Readers also need to use conscious processing to resolve ambiguity at times. For example, let's say you encountered the following passage in the same text. And again, I would love to have a reader just because I absolutely adore to have diverse voices alongside mine. So Melissa S., would you mind please reading the second passage on the slide for us, please?
Sure. John walked down the steps with care. Janine looked at him up and down while she waited. Finally, she said, "Well, I'm glad I've got some fish in my purse."
Thank you so much, Melissa. So while you automatically inferred what was happening in the first passage, this one might actually make you stop and think, as it did with myself, okay, to be quite transparent, might make you stop and think, wait, why does she have a fish in her purse? What's going on? Is she going to eat that later? Right? And then you continue to activate your schema and think, okay, what do I know about tuxedos? What type of reference? I doubt she has a fish in her, an actual fish in her purse. Okay, so what else do I have stored in my schema that I can make a connection to? Right? Well, I know that tuxedos, you might say that you look like a penguin, penguins eat fish. Aha, she's making a joke. Right? These are all of the ways that our schema is activated and how background knowledge supports us as readers. Let's go ahead and take a look at another example. We are going to take the next minute and 30 seconds to silently read the passage on the slide without a title, and that's by design. The goal here is not necessarily for you to guess what this passage is about. The goal is to be able to provide a summary that articulates the main idea of the passage. And you can just go ahead and chat done once you've had the chance to read the passage and think a little bit about what is happening in it. Fabulous. Quite a few dones coming through. Thank you for taking a moment to read. So now I would love to hear from you. So after reading this, what did you determine to be the main idea of this passage? And if you would like to share, please put your name in the chat now or simply hop off mute and tell us what you determined. Thanks, Christine. Want to come off mute and tell us a little bit about how you deduced that?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I thought of you have to choose your ingredients for your dinner. So you're kind of deciding what you need. If you don't have enough, you do have to go someplace else, like the grocery store, to pick up things. And you never get to stop making dinner ever in your entire life. So you put them back in the fridge, and then the next day you might take the same ones out or different ones out and try it again.
Well, Christine, I can certainly agree with many of the sentiments there that you shared. Can't say I make the best dinners, but here we are. I'm seeing some other ideas coming in the chat as well. Someone who shared laundry. Let's turn to Jonathan T. If you don't mind, Jonathan, to tell us a little bit about why you selected laundry.
Yeah, absolutely. So just thinking about, I think it mentioned arranging things in piles. There's two different groups, and then, you know, the text, I mean, the line that says, of course, one pile may be sufficient depending upon how much there is to do. And then at the end, when it talked about the whole cycle, to me, it made me think of laundry.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate that. And I will now, like a drum roll, please, to reveal the title of the passage. I hear the silent drum rolls coming from afar. The title of the passage is, in fact, Washing Clothes. So now that we know the title of the passage, which many of you inferred or were making otherwise interesting connections based on the passage, you might reread the passage and think about what terms, vocabulary, or phrases pop out at you and take on a new meaning based on that title. So once your prior knowledge has been activated, you can see that the meaning and the ability of our brains to make those connections is far deeper. However, it's important to note that providing a title is not an example of building schema, really. It's just meant to simulate the experience of not properly accessing your prior knowledge and a framework for understanding a topic that you already know about. Activating schema doesn't necessarily mean we're simplifying or reducing the rigor in any way. It just provides access. So remember, in the case of multilingual learners, they're attending to both the cognitive and the linguistic load of the learning. So if you already have an existing schema about a topic, new knowledge and language is more likely to be easily processed and remembered. Besides leveraging how our brains process new information, schema building experiences are effective for learning new information for a variety of other beneficial reasons. We know that students who struggle academically are more likely to shut down on concepts that they perceive as irrelevant to them. So let's take a moment to think about the pre-work that you did leading up to this session, and also just your experiences as an educator. What are some of the benefits of activating background knowledge that either you found in the reading or that you've experienced in your own practices? What are some benefits of activating prior knowledge? You can share those out in the chat now for us. Thanks, Susan. Absolutely, freeing working memory. It helps to understand what I'm reading. Same here. Students can visualize comprehension. Absolutely. Connect the new to the known. So these are all absolutely true. And there's even more research-based evidence as to why this creates a profound practice for students. And so we can advance on the slide as well. It shows us that schema building strategies are meant to create value, relevance, and interest. They also foster motivation and long-term retention of content. Regardless of the content area, they intend to speak to the students' need to answer the question, what does this have to do with me? And so with that, we are going to reflect on your own experience in the classroom. And whether you're visiting classrooms now or your previous experience, how are those first few moments of class typically spent? What are the students doing? What are the teachers doing in those first few minutes? You can go ahead and share your thinking in the chat here as well. I'll put that question there for reference. Yeah, perhaps a do now. Thanks, Molly. Setting the stage for the day's learning. Bell ringer, absolutely. And this can look different in different classrooms as well. Sometimes there's a do now, sometimes there's procedural elements that need to happen, such as taking attendance and things like this. But this slide points out to us, and thank you for your responses in the chat. This slide points out to us what research has shown, that the first few moments of a class are when the students decide how much, if at all, am I going to engage both cognitively, verbally, and in my writing? How much am I going to engage in this content, right? So this holds even more true for students who are developing performers in that topic. If they can gain immediate footing via interest in that class, in that topic, they're more likely to participate and intellectually engage in that day's lesson. So now we're going to take all this kind of brain research and science and turn it back to ourselves. And we're going to get to have a little bit of conversation with our colleagues, which I always love. In a moment, we are going to head into breakouts to do some brainstorming together, take this brain science and think about how it applies to our own district and our own students. So we have these 3 questions on the slide, and I'll share them in the chat as well. But we would love for you to discuss these 3 items, not in any particular order, but just doing that brainstorming to think about building capacity with schema building in your district. So what might you need to know about students in the classroom context to build schema without removing productive struggle? How can schema building activities create more equitable experiences for culturally and linguistically diverse students? And what shifts need to take place in how teachers are approaching warm-ups, do now, and seat work to build that immediate engagement that research has taught us will indicate how much a student may participate. I'll share these questions in the chat as well. And in just a moment, you'll be invited to join a breakout. And please be ready to share out when we return. Thank you all so much. Engaging in those breakouts, we're going to turn it over to Catherine C. To hear your response. Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome. We talked a lot about the first two questions and the importance of knowing who your students are and building relationships with them. And that is clearly easier to do in an elementary school and maybe a little more challenging with the schedules of a middle and high school, but how valuable it is to spend a few minutes, during each class period or being intentional about that each week, no matter what grade level you're teaching, so that you do understand who your children are and to offer, a productive opportunity for them to learn, so that you'll know what their learning styles are, and also that you know a bit about their background and not to make assumptions about maybe what you think their experiences might be outside of school culturally, and what their backgrounds might make you think, but to really, deepen your understanding and building relationships with students. We also talked about an activity that you could do at the beginning of each class, just to kind of gauge what your students know about a topic before teaching a unit of study, and that might influence how you group students, how you introduce a topic, and how important, we also emphasized how important it was to, hook the students at the beginning of a unit, but it does take knowing your students as learners and knowing a bit about their backgrounds.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Absolutely. I like that you are, I appreciate that you were able to share out the different ways in which it's important to build those relationships and the different types of information, like cultural information that you might be gathering. And that's something that we talked about in breakout room 3 as well. I would love to invite Heidi to the mic, if you don't mind, to share your thinking around your experiences as a math coach.
Sure. Hi. I was just sharing that when I'm teaching math, I often try to start with a picture or a video, something that students can look at, and we often ask, what do you notice? What do you wonder? And it's a way for kids to make connections to the image or the video. Also to think what do I wonder about this? Because that can lead to math questions. And to build vocabulary, right? So for linguistically diverse students, you can be writing down words that are coming up as kids are noticing. And then the work that kids have to do is connected somehow to that picture or that video.
Heidi, so appreciate you sharing and thinking about the different ways that you engage students mathematically, and especially thinking about culturally and linguistically diverse students in mathematics, especially because the research has shown us, right, that those first few moments can really indicate the student's engagement moving forward. And just Heidi, as a quick follow-up, why do you think that's particularly important in math or useful in your experience?
A lot of times, if you just give kids word problems, there's a lot of text on the page. It's kind of boring. I mean, it might not be a lot of text, but it feels like a lot of text to kids. I think a lot of word problems feel kind of dry, right, and meaningless. And so if there's some way to connect it, and this goes back to question 1, what do I know about my students, and how can I make a math problem that connects to their lives or something that matters to them? And then how can I bring it alive for them with a picture before they get into just the text and figuring out what is this question asking me to do, right? But just bringing them into the context first.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Absolutely. And what you shared here in terms of bringing students into context in a very concrete way is the perfect transition to the next portion of our time together today, which is about identifying criteria for effective schema building strategies, which many of you were excited about. So with that transition, I'm going to hand it back over to Irene.
Great, thanks, Margaret. And I just want to quickly acknowledge that the group that we have with us today, you all are bringing a ton of expertise and knowledge to this topic, which I think is wonderful, being that we can share it with one another. And something that we might have not mentioned earlier on is that ideally you're taking the materials that you're getting today and the conversations you're having back to your teacher. So hopefully for those of you who are also bringing deep expertise, this is still a chance to deepen that knowledge and to bring it back to your teachers. So with that said, we're going to, just as Margaret said, transition over into discussing criteria for effective schema building strategies. So in general, we're looking for experiences that give students a hands-on experiential way to quickly dive into new content, something that's going to pique their curiosity and also build that confidence that they're going to need in order to take those risks necessary with new learning. And what's critical to these exercises, which many of you have already touched upon, is that they're inclusive of students with diverse learning needs, especially those who may need the most support with accessing new content. So we're looking for experiences that leverage an aspect of the new learning that's already familiar to students. That way we can use that as an entry point into the new concepts that they'll be engaging with. We're also looking for activities that are focused on the central concept at the heart of the lesson or the unit, because we use that focus as the base upon which we're going to build all of our new learning. The idea is not to just have something that's exciting or engaging for students, but that it's very intentional in the planning and structure. We're also looking for activities that are collaborative in nature and allow students to engage in those collaborative conversations where they're negotiating meaning and using familiar oral language. And this might mean, especially for your English learners, that they are engaging with small groups of students who share a similar home language, as that will enable them greater access to that prior knowledge that they need to activate. And then, just as you all began to highlight in our last section, sometimes something we might forget is that these activities don't have to rely on supplemental text, where they can rely very heavily on visuals, something that has minimal text, and in general, a low linguistic load. The idea is to grant access to all students, regardless of their literacy level at this point in the learning. And then one last reminder we like to share is that it's critical to consider not just the content. Today, we're going to be talking a lot more in that realm, but also the context. And as I've seen in the chat, knowing your students. So considering what you know about them as you're designing these schema building activities. So before we jump into analyzing a few examples, I want to address two common misconceptions about these practices that sometimes get in the way of providing what are actually very meaningful and effective experiences for students. So let's look at that first bubble. Could I ask Katie, my colleague Katie Buckland, if you could read that first bubble for us?
Of course. English learners must have at least an intermediate level of English proficiency to participate in any new content learning in English, regardless of prior knowledge.
Thanks for that, Katie. And so with this first misconception, so for many English learners, it's the case that the prior knowledge that we want them to activate was gained in a language other than English. The reality is that even if the instruction of the new content is in English, they still benefit greatly from opportunities to access that prior knowledge. And English learners of all proficiency levels need these opportunities before learning new content. It's important to know that the way our brains and language work, once you know and understand something in one language or context, you can learn to express it in another. So in other words, that knowledge transfers and can be used to learn new information in a new language. People can and do learn new information through a language they do not speak well yet. And this is often facilitated by opportunities to revisit what they do know in a language that they're already fluent in. Again, this means we're giving students opportunities to work in similar language groups when possible and appropriate, and use multilingual resources to the best of our ability. And then we have another misconception that is very common in this space that we'd like to address as well. Can I ask Greg Leap, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute to read that second one?
Sure. Schema building is the same as front loading and therefore removes opportunities for productive struggle.
Thank you. So we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at this one. So the concept of front loading before a first read has come to be criticized, especially in the context of reading complex text, as it's believed to remove the rigor or take away valuable thinking opportunities for students. This may include activities such as introducing a new reading with a simple summary or some sort of pre-reading mini lesson or explicit vocabulary instruction. However, when done effectively, these practices have real and crucial benefits for English learners and struggling readers. But to make sure we're providing sufficient entry points for these groups of students, we want to consider a few questions prior to introducing that new text. So we want to think about, is there a way to pre-teach vocabulary in a way that is contextualized and authentic? It gives students an opportunity to begin to use that new vocabulary as part of their productive language as they're learning new material. We want to ask ourselves if front-loading X information is actually taking away from the learning goal, or is it actually providing access to more complex concepts and text? So in a sense, we have to think about what is unnecessarily difficult at this point for this lesson that we can strip back with maintaining the complexity. So removing some of the unnecessary difficulty while retaining complexity. We also want to think about if students have the language necessary to engage with the learning. And if not, how could it be authentically front-loaded? So here when we say language, we're not just talking about vocabulary. We're talking about, let's say, for example, the language we use when we're composing an argumentative essay. So do students know that language for providing evidence and reasoning and so forth? And also, finally, we want to consider if front-loading supports engagement, motivation, and independence that will lead to that deeper learning. So with all of that said, we want to now take a look at a few activities to compare to see which ones meet this criteria and are strong, effective schema building activities. A few things to note. So again, in your deck, in your copy of the presentation deck, you can see the criteria if you'd like to refer back to it as we engage with these next activities. And also there's just a little, I like to use this kind of as a cheat sheet reminder about what it means to build schema. As Margaret mentioned earlier, we're not talking about the 5-minute, 10-minute homework review. That's something that can maybe come later at a different point or be used more, that time used more effectively. When we're talking about building schema, we want to first activate that prior knowledge. So what do they already know? How do I get them to access it? And second, we want to fortify or strengthen that background knowledge. So how do I use what they know to bridge or scaffold them into that target content? So let's take a look at our first example here. We're comparing these two activities. We're at the beginning of a unit on the hero's journey, and the teacher wants to build schema through either of these two activities. Again, schema building occurs in those two steps of activating and fortifying. So Let's take a look at these two activities first independently to just review which one you think is stronger and why. And then we'll go into breakout groups and reconvene to debrief. So take about 1 to 2 minutes, let's say, to just review, and then we'll go into breakouts. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us on some of our tech issues today. I heard there were great conversations happening discussing these two examples. Margaret, you shared that from your group, there were some ideas you wanted to lift up. Would you mind sharing those with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Irene. We were having a really robust discussion about the differences. And if it's all right, I would actually love to hear from Ellen, Ellen G from our group, if you don't mind lifting up what we were discussing and the differences there based on the criteria.
Might have lost her.
That's all right. We can have Melissa step in if Ellen is no longer available. Melissa, would you mind speaking?
Sure. So our group just kind of looked at slide 18 that had those 4 points to look at, and we kind of felt that B was more inclusive as far as it had minimal text. It was more collaborative, where kids had a peer partner to work with. It fit the criteria as far as like an entry point, because it phrased it in a way where kids were brainstorming people and characteristics or stories. So they had more options than compared to A.
Absolutely. Thanks, Melissa, for showing or for highlighting for us just how much more inclusive the second example was, and the additional opportunities for students to collaborate. Thanks to that. Anything else we could layer onto that? And feel free to share in the chat as well. Clark Smith.
It's Shayna.
I was like, I'm just gonna say it all because I'm not sure.
It's okay. Clark's here right beside me. But so I was saying that I really liked these two examples, and I would even like to share them with the teachers in our school for like a professional development, because they're so similar. But those small differences between example A and example B make such a huge difference in terms of providing the students with an access point. What I really like about B is that you're asking students to think about their own experiences, which makes it much more accessible, because some students may not remember from last year. And also they're able to make connections to the learning. So when students are able to make connections to their personal lives and experiences, it deepens the learning and allows students to be able to move that learning from their short-term memory to their long-term memory. So I just think that they would be able to really take away a lot more from B, but the differences are so small. And then the other thing that was really good was having the students share out and the teacher write it on the board, because the teacher can access the students' prior knowledge when she's hearing all of their different ideas, and kind of get an idea in terms of where everyone in her class is at in terms of understanding what a hero is.
Absolutely. I couldn't have summed it up better myself. Thank you so much for contributing that and highlighting that, yes, they do on face value seem very similar, but those nuanced differences and the intentionality behind the second one really make that difference for students in what you so wonderfully described of having it being a more meaningful experience that really prepares them for that new learning. The teachers visually capturing what they're being able to share, and she she or he himself refer back to it. Thanks for sharing that and all the great conversation you all have had. One final thing to highlight here is just that we see in the second one that the teacher is taking that step to also strengthen that background knowledge, not just stopping with the quick 60 seconds, making it a little bit of a throwaway activity, but instead making it a much more meaningful and effective engagement for students. So thank you everyone for that. Let's go ahead and we're going to practice another one. This one we're actually going to get to see also in practice play out in a classroom in a moment. So again, we have two examples, which I'm sure for many of you, it is very obvious why one is stronger than the other. But again, as your colleague highlighted, the idea here is for us to do this analysis so then we can bring it back and have teachers engage with it. So even though it is obvious, we're going to unpack it a bit more. So I want to give you all a moment to read the two examples, again, apply that criteria, and then we're going to watch it in action. So take a moment to read and just note for yourself what makes either one of these the stronger, more effective schema building activity. Okay, so hopefully you have an idea now of which one you would choose. If you are still on the fence, we're going to go ahead and take a look at activity B in action. So as we're watching the video, I'd like for you to consider what are some of the potential benefits of this specific schema building exercise? What makes B, the one we're going to see, a stronger activity? And then what other questions has this maybe left you with? So instead of watching the video altogether, we're actually going to chat you the link to the video to watch on your own. So if you could click on the link, it's about 6 minutes. Feel free to turn off your video. And when you have completed watching, if you could signal to us by turning your video back on or writing in the chat done, then we'll regroup so that we can go to debrief and breakouts. So again, you're watching the video link on your own. So it looks like we're all about ready to go into breakouts. We know for a few of you had the link was not working, so you're going to be in a room with Katie just to watch the video again. Right now, we'd like to send you to breakouts to again discuss what made B, the activity that you watched, the stronger schema building activity. What were some of the benefits and what questions might you have been left with? And we're going to go into breakouts for about 5 to 6 minutes, and then we'll come back together. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for engaging in your groups. I heard there was great conversation happening in many, and I'd like to invite you all, if you would like to come off mute to share, put your name in the chat and share some of your reflections on what made this a strong activity, maybe other questions it's left you with that we can share amongst our group.
This is Diana. I'd be happy to share.
Thanks, Diana.
Sorry, there's some basketball going on behind me, so it might be a little loud. In the group, I had talked a bit about just how I really liked that the teacher was giving students like multiple opportunities to be able to participate in and interact with the concept of being persuasive. They had to share their own story. They then had to listen to someone else's story. They had to analyze that story, be able to summarize it. So they had over and over again, all this practice of being able to be persuasive and see that, they are familiar with it and could apply it, to other concepts. And then now the teacher has so many great examples and ways to connect back to, okay, Susan, remember how you talked about your cousin and the car? Well, this is the exact same thing that's happening in the story we're reading right now. So I think it was just a really great way to, get students practicing it, but then also preparing the teacher to kind of loop back to it later.
Absolutely. Thanks for all of those great examples and highlighting that, Diana, for us. I like what you were saying about having them practice already using that language and being able to come back to it. I'm a firm believer of when students have that chance to use the language and hear themselves saying it, that it really becomes a more, they have more ownership over that academic language. Thanks, Diana. Love to hear from other folks. If you'd like, just come off mute. And if someone's already speaking, if you can put your name in the chat, we'd love to hear from you. Great, thank you.
I was just going to say that I don't think I'm answering your question, but I just wanted to point out that I really love this graphic organizer for teachers to help them understand and process when they're lesson planning, how it all relates. And how are you activating the prior knowledge? And then how are you going to fortify that? And how do the two connect? And having them side by side like that, I feel like would be really helpful. So I just wanted to point out that I really like this graphic organizer.
Well, you are in luck because that's actually a great segue to our next section, where we're going to look at some other resources to help teachers with seeing that nuance difference and planning it. So I'm really glad that you're seeing this as a tool that teachers will be able to use. I think as other ideas come through about your reflections on the video and what you saw and noticed and how it aligned to the criteria, you keep sharing in the chat, but we're going to go ahead and move on to get in a little bit more practice with these resources and tools. So before we transition to our next section, I did want to provide you all with a few more resources that you might use back at your school with teachers, either during a PLC or any other professional learning opportunity. These two resources come from the English Learner Success Forum. And while their focus is on English learners, as stated in their name, these examples and resources are great for all students. So that first document you see there provides examples and non-examples of strong schema building exercises, as well as justification for what makes them strongly aligned, or what makes these strategies strongly aligned. Both are great for deepening and refining educators' understanding of what effective schema building activities can look like. So you'll see links to these two resources in your handout for today. And so in this next section, we're going to do a bit more of applying our learning to designing effective schema building activities. And we'll also review a few more additional resources and steps that educators can take to prepare. So here, similar to the graphic organizer we were showing on a previous slide, this is a planning template that teachers can use to help them prepare for these types of engagements. And I'd like for you all to take a moment to either look at it on your slide in the deck, or there's also a copy in the handout, just to orient yourselves to what all is in there, and then we're going to go over it. So just take, I think, about 30 seconds to take a look at what's in there. So a few key noticings I'm hoping you're taking away here is this first part where we're having teachers identify what is the central concept at the heart of the lesson or the target content. So we don't want this part of the lesson to turn into a random activity, again, that's just meant to entertain students or just really briefly spark some prior knowledge. We want it to be really meaningful and intentional. As you saw in the video, these activities can take time, and we want to make sure that we're intentional about how it connects to the lesson. As you saw in the video, that activity the students were engaging in, it wasn't you know, a 60-second or even a 5-minute engagement, but that time spent on it, the teacher made it worth it because it really prepared students and throughout connected to what the students would be working on. And then in this next section, we're looking at what schema needs to be built. So again, that occurs in 2 steps. We're activating prior knowledge, so figuring out what they already know, and we're building background, so addressing the most critical prerequisite content. And then down here at the bottom is where we note different activities. And we're going to look at a few resources. I will say educators sometimes underestimate how rich their toolbox is. Oftentimes there are many structures and strategies and activities that they have in their toolbox. Right now, we're thinking about how to use those more intentionally and effectively. So when teachers are preparing for these types of engagements, one tool that I highly recommend starting with is the Standards Navigator tool. So again, just to go back really quickly, this red square where it says building background knowledge, this is really about thinking about what is that most critical prerequisite content or skills students will need in order to access the new learning. So using the Standards Navigator tool, we can go and look at the standard and then see what is the prerequisite content that students will need to access the new learning and integrate that as part of that schema building engagement. So let's take a look at how we might do this. So let's say we have a group of 8th graders, an 8th grade science class, and we've begun a unit on tectonic plates and the impact of landmass movement. We can see here the standard that the students are working on. Let's say this class is comprised of students of different reading levels and beginning to intermediate levels of English proficiency and are from all different regions of the world. Let's take a look at now the prerequisite standards. And what you're seeing on your screen is pulled from the Standards Navigator, those coherence maps. I know it's a bit small, but hopefully you're able to see it in your version of the deck. So taking a look at some of those prerequisite standards, if we know students are going to be working on a unit with about tectonic plates and the impact of landmass movement as stated in the standard, what is some of that prerequisite background knowledge students might need to be built? What do they need to know? And feel free to share in the chat. For the interest of time, we're just going to keep moving because I want to make sure we get to the next part. Yes, that's exactly, thank you in the chat if you haven't seen it. We want students to be able to as it says, analyze and interpret maps, have that associated vocabulary, academic vocabulary, in order to engage with the grade level content. So if we look at the template, we can see what this teacher may have designed in order to build that schema in those two phases. And what you're going to see here in this sample, it's a bit more elaborate than maybe you're expecting teachers to produce, but we wanted to make sure you had a full view of the possibilities. So let me go ahead and see why it's not showing. There we go. So here we see they've identified the target content. What is the central concept? And we want for students to focus on. And I want to give you all a minute to see the different activities that the teacher selected for activating prior knowledge versus building background knowledge. And we can see that this teacher has highlighted this concept of Pangea as something that students might not be familiar with, but will need in order to engage with the grade level content. What do you notice about what the teacher has selected for activating prior knowledge? And I'll reveal the activities as well so we can see that. What are some of your noticings about what has been selected? And I see several people going close to the screen, so I apologize for the size, but I see someone came off mute.
Yeah, I was gonna say, this looks like a lot of like multimodal ways of presenting the information, a lot of videos, pictures, discussion. So you're really kind of activating all kind of learning styles and stuff like that.
Yes, thanks, Brian, for calling that out. That again, we want it to be something experiential. It doesn't just have to be reading a supplemental text, but really getting students to collaborate, to speak with one another, and engage in a more collaborative way. Thanks for that. And I've seen some more ideas coming through in the chat. Yep, natural disasters are a part of their daily lives. In our previous session, we had a few participants point out that for some students, depending on their background or where they're coming from, that could be a sensitive topic. So it is important to always approach this through a knowledge of knowing, through a lens of knowing your students and their previous experiences. Great, connecting to personal experience, lots of variety of options. It's both visual and some text associated, so great. We wanted to also share with you that this resource, it's in the handout, as well as a few more to share with teachers when they're designing these activities. So as I said, I firmly believe educators underestimate how many tools they have in their toolbox about these different types of engagements, but we did want to provide you all with a few more resources that describe different structures for these types of activities. Some might be familiar and some might be newer. There's also a website I highly recommend for other videos that model teachers engaging in these schema building structures and activities. So again, more resources to bring back to your school to show teachers the most effective way to design and engage in these strategies. So, and then finally, before we transition to our last section, we just have another similar template set up for you so that when you engage in this professional development with your teachers, you have another template and resource to model for them how they would use this template. And with that, I'm going to transition it back to Margaret for our last section.
Thank you, Irene, and thank you everyone for your hard work and participation so far. We are now going to pivot into some of the capacity building section of our work. And before we do that, we just want to quickly recap all of the great work that you've done so far. And we'll also go ahead and share the link to the survey in the chat, just in case some folks here today need to pop off at the 90-minute mark. We would love and appreciate your feedback and your thoughts on the session so far. So we have done a lot of work thinking about the role and importance of schema building to accelerate learning. We've also identified the criteria for the effective schema building strategies, and we've been able to apply some of that new learning to design effective schema building strategies as well. And we got a ton of great resources from Irene that you can hopefully then go and turn and share with folks in your school and in your district. So in order to do that, we're going to step kind of out of this new learning, and we're going to step into your shoes as school and district leaders that you are, and think about how can we take this new learning that we've grappled with, or this learning we've grappled with, and turnkey it and make it effective to accelerate learning in our schools. And so with that, leaders have a few levers at your disposal, as I'm sure all of you know, to help and assist in activating big systemic shifts and changes. So we can advance to the next slide with that, please. So we have these 4 levers here on the slide, which can be used to impact teacher and staff behavior and actions, and as a result, student outcomes. So we'll discuss these levers briefly here, and then we'll have the chance to go into breakouts and discuss with our team some ideas and brainstorm around how we can work these levers to take our learning and build capacity in our schools and our systems. So the first lever that you see here is expectations. So what are the precise expectations of adults in this circumstance or with this new learning? And what will you communicate to teachers? The next lever that we have is tools. So what tools will the adults or the students need to meet these expectations? An example in this case might be one of the graphic organizers that Irene shared with us, or perhaps the video that we use to analyze. Then we have supports. So what support or development do adults need to implement the system? And then lastly, one of my personal favorites is time. So what time will adults need, or perhaps students need, to learn and refine for implementation? So I would love for everyone to just take a moment and reflect on these levers. Think which one of these levers would I love to kind of talk more with and kind of brainstorm and bounce some ideas around with my colleagues from across the state and other professionals. This might be a lever that you feel really confident about and that you have ideas about, or it might be a lever that you're like, I don't know how to think about supports, and I would love to pick someone else's expertise to learn more about how they'll be utilizing supports. So right now, please share in the chat, which one of these levers would you like to discuss and begin doing some planning around? And you can share that in the chat for us now, please. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your levers in the chat. Lots of expectations, some support. Perfect. So our next step is actually going to be to have you select which breakout room you would like to join. So you should be able to, and I'll confirm here with Tabitha, who's managing those breakouts, you should be able to opt into which breakout room you would like to join based on your lever. Tabitha, is that accurate?
Yep, we are all set. So let me know when to open.
Thank you so much. I believe that we are good to open. now. And we'll spend the next 20 minutes in breakouts having a discussion, sharing our thinking, jotting our notes, and generating new ideas to bring this learning to your schools and systems.
So you can go ahead and pick a breakout room. If you don't see the option on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can click on breakouts and you should be able to click into it by that.
Thank you, Tabitha. You can go ahead and start. You can go ahead and start sharing your thinking in the chat for us. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much. I was able to visit most breakout rooms there, and the conversations were really robust and rigorous. And from a facilitator standpoint, really appreciated your deep and thoughtful conversations. So thank you so much for reflecting on those levers and thinking about your role in systems-wide change and capacity building. And so with that, here we are at the close of our session, and we would love to wrap up thinking not only about the capacity building that we just did, but thinking about the arc of our session in its entirety. And to do that, we invite you to participate in this closing reflection. You can select one of the sentence starters or prompts that you see on this slide. I recognize, I learned, I'm surprised by, and I want to learn more about. Go ahead and select one of those and then share your closing reflection in the chat. And as you do that, we do have our survey link that you can go ahead and click into just to make sure that's open. We really look forward to your feedback. And of course, as you're thinking about those closing reflections to share in the chat, we also invite you to just come off mute and share any key takeaways that you discussed with your colleagues or from the session today as well. Thanks, Erin. Really appreciate you getting us started. Absolutely. And that's, you know, Erin, to your point, something that we really value about these times and sessions together is just the opportunity to collaborate with others, professionals from around the state, and just learn from each other. So we appreciate this unique opportunity along with you. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Diana and Sarah. Diana, if you don't mind to come off mute and just talk us through a little bit about your final reflection as others submit theirs.
Sure. So mine, I said, I recognize that activating prior knowledge is important for both teachers and for students, because teachers can use the information for planning and students can practice skills and gain confidence before jumping into the depth of the content. So I was thinking a lot about, like the video that we watched and how the students had a chance to, like practice, the persuasive skills in several different ways and kind of see that they could be persuasive and understand how to kind of acknowledge it and identify it in other situations and from other people's experiences. And of course, the teacher could use that to be able to do some further planning. Did the students really understand it? Like, kind of a dipstick of where they were, and then be able to build on it and like use those student examples and embed them into the content. So I think that was just like a really powerful video and just a really clear, quick, easy example of, taking the concept of activating prior knowledge and just making it like a skill building activity. And so it's not, and I was just talking about in my group, kind of the last points we were making was that this kind of work doesn't need to be in reinventing the wheel. It's just kind of fine tuning teachers things they're already doing right now. So they probably already are activating students' prior knowledge, but it's like, how can you do it in a really purposeful way that give you a lot of gains in like a short period of time? So less teacher talk, more student talk, and getting them to do more of the thinking in a broader context. So just fine tuning what teachers are already doing and showing them that it can be a really powerful tool.
Thank you so much, Diana. And what a powerful point to close on. We know that teachers are working maybe harder than they ever have and are inundated with many new ideas and challenges in this really unique and challenging year. And so as much as we can frame that this is building on exercises that they're already doing, it's not reinventing the wheel. And research has shown us that it is for the betterment of student comprehension and understanding and across all subject matters and with all learners, the impact there can be tremendous. So thank you so much for lifting that up and giving us such a strong point of closure. And with that, again, we invite you to participate in our survey. We look at your responses very carefully and use them in planning upcoming sessions. And so we also invite you back again. We'll have more of these very concrete PDs coming your way over the course of the year. And we would love to see this group in particular back again. So be on the lookout for more information from TNTP and DESI there. And we thank you all so much for your time and your effort and energy today. And Irene, I'm not sure if you have any closing words as well, but thank you all so much.
Great, thanks, Margaret. And thank you everyone for your engagement today. I'm seeing some questions about math and a bit of the lack of math in today's session. I definitely encourage you to come to our future sessions. We're gonna have a session on scaffolding next, where we will go over some examples of scaffolding in mathematics, as well as referring back to some of our sessions that have recently passed, where we also discuss identifying critical prerequisite content in math. So we hope we'll check those out. We hope to see you at a future session. Thanks, everyone.